Hello everyone, welcome back to Dewey's YouTube channel for ghost stories. I hope you all have an exciting time listening to today's ghost stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Dewey's YouTube channel to receive the latest ghost story videos. Now, let's dive into today's stories. To begin, Dewey will share with everyone some spiritual tales from the That Sun region in Anjiang. As recounted by a woman. For those who know Anjiang, they are likely familiar with Nui Kam, Forbidden Mountain, which is the highest and most sacred mountain in Anjiang. She shared that in the past, before roads or cable cars were built to the mountain's peak like today, locals had to climb narrow paths along the streams on the mountain's slopes. Indeed, Dewey has experienced both the cable car and motorbike rides to the peak. The paths are extremely dangerous, and motorbike drivers have to use the lowest gear to navigate the steep slopes. Compared to these paths, the slopes in Dalat are nothing. Even now, with roads in place, the journey remains challenging. Back then, during our grandparents' time, there were only narrow trails leading up the mountain, making the journey even more arduous. This story revolves around the narrator's grandmother, who was a devout follower of Hoa Hao Buddhism. In Anjiang, most people follow the Hoa Hao religion. Every year, her grandmother would join pilgrimage groups to visit temples on Nui Kam to worship Buddha. On one occasion, her grandmother joined a pilgrimage group to trek up the narrow paths to Van Lin Temple, a beautiful temple at the mountain's peak. Despite her age, her grandmother was very healthy and climbed the mountain effortlessly. However, as they neared the temple, she felt slightly tired and decided to rest under a tree before continuing. While resting under the tree at noon, her grandmother noticed a white shadow passing in front of her. She didn't think much of it and continued her journey to the temple. After offering incense at the temple, she decided to descend the mountain alone and return home to Chao Dok, where the narrator's family lived. Upon arriving in Chao Dok, she rested and chatted with the narrator's mother. During this time, her grandmother repeatedly spoke of ominous events she felt were about to happen. She told the family that she would not return to Nui Kam again, as she felt something bad might occur. While the narrator's mother didn't believe her at first, she dismissed it as fatigue from the trip. After her grandmother returned to her home in Chomwa, Anjiang, her health deteriorated rapidly. A visit to the doctor revealed that she had cancer and required immediate surgery. Though the surgery was performed, the cancer had already spread. One day, her grandmother gathered her children and expressed a wish to shave her head. This was unusual, as Hoa Hao followers typically kept their hair long and tied it into a bun. Despite their surprise, the family respected her wishes and shaved her head. Later, her grandmother confided in the narrator's mother about a deceased aunt who had passed away young, with hair only reaching her earlobes. Her grandmother said that in recent days, she had seen this aunt in her dreams, inviting her to join her. After shaving her head, her grandmother's health continued to decline. When her hair grew back to the length of her deceased aunt's, her grandmother passed away peacefully. Her family believed that she had foreseen her death and prepared herself, including shaving her head. On the first anniversary of her grandmother's death, the family gathered to chant prayers and perform rituals for her. That day, a large butterfly, often referred to as a soul butterfly, landed on her grandmother's memorial photo. The butterfly stayed there throughout the prayers and rituals, only flying away in the evening. The family believed it was her grandmother's spirit returning to witness the ceremony. This was the story of her grandmother's spiritual journey, connected to Nui Kam and her faith, following the Hoa Hao Buddhism. However, when my mom married my dad, she didn't frequently go on pilgrimages or perform rituals like my grandmother. The reason was that after marrying my dad, who worked as a police officer and followed atheism, they only worshipped ancestors and didn't adhere to many religious practices. Although the religion was still maintained, they didn't participate as actively as others. My sister mentioned that my dad used to enjoy exercising a lot. Our house was near Sam Mountain, so every morning, he would go up the mountain for exercise and walking to stay healthy. She also added that the path leading up Sam Mountain had a cemetery where locals were buried, and there were scattered graves along the way. Every morning, my dad would go up there to exercise. Occasionally, my mom would join him, but she was a rather superstitious person. If she felt weak or unwell, she would often claim to see ghosts. Usually, my dad would climb the mountain with his friends. But for some reason, one morning at 4 a.m., he insisted that my mom join him. The couple went up the mountain early to return in time to take my siblings to school. However, strangely, every time they returned from climbing the mountain, bruises would appear on their arms and legs. These bruises were dark and didn't hurt when touched. Every time they went, more bruises would appear, but on days they overslept and didn't go, the bruises wouldn't appear. After a few days of climbing, my mom came back with so many bruises that my sister asked about it. My mom joked that it might be ghost dogs biting her because there's a belief that ghost dog bites leave painless bruises. Despite the bruises, my parents didn't know what caused them. My dad continued climbing the mountain every morning, even after my mom decided to stop going due to feeling unwell. One day, my mom reluctantly joined my dad but could only climb a short distance before she saw something near a graveyard. She claimed to have seen many ghosts and urged my dad to hurry. My dad asked why she wanted to leave after only 10 minutes. But my mom didn't respond and quickly headed home. That day, after returning, my mom was so exhausted that she couldn't cook and fell ill for several days. My sister asked my dad what happened, and he explained that my mom had seen something unclean near the cemetery, which scared her and made her sick. Since then, my mom refused to climb the mountain using that path again. My dad, however, continued going with his friends. He often encouraged my sister to join him, but my mom strictly forbade it. Another story involves a seance my sister experienced when she was young. In her neighborhood, she had a friend named Mai. At that time, Mai's father, who was still young, had always been known for being superstitious and easily frightened. In their family, the male members often died young, so everyone worried about him. He frequently encountered ghosts wherever he went. One night, a group of young men in the neighborhood, around the same age as Mai's father, decided to conduct a séance under a tree behind the area. This tree was infamous because a girl had hanged herself there, making it a spiritually significant spot. The group brought a spirit board made from coffin wood and wrote letters, numbers, and other symbols on it to communicate with spirits. Among them was a man named Fook, who had spiritual sensitivity and acted as the séance leader. When Mai's father saw the group preparing for the séance, he was curious and joined to watch, though he didn't initially participate. Fook attempted to summon spirits several times, but the board didn't move, and the group became frustrated. They then remembered Mai's father, who was believed to have spiritual sensitivity due to his superstitious nature. They encouraged him to try leading the séance. Although hesitant, Mai's father eventually agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly to escape the mosquitoes biting him while he stood idle. He had never been directly confronted by spirits before and decided to give it a try. After sitting down and placing his finger on the board, he recited an incantation to summon spirits. As soon as he finished, a strong wind began to blow. When he asked if it was a ghost or a demon, the board moved to the demon symbol. At that moment, the other men panicked and ran away, leaving Mai's father alone. He didn't remember much of what happened afterward. The next morning, everyone was back at home, but the events of that night left a lasting impression on them. That night, no one was arrested. However, the next morning, when everyone returned home, Mr. Kai in the group said, "Last night, when I turned around and ran, I looked back and saw Mr. Sao still sitting there, on the branch of the goro tree. There was a girl wearing a white dress sitting on the branch, swinging her legs down." That day, Mr. Sao also made it home, but when he got there, he couldn't clearly remember how he managed to get back. He didn't know how he even remembered the way home. Strangely, after returning, his wife and children noticed that he started acting differently, not like a normal person anymore. When people saw Mr. Sao acting erratically after coming back from the séance, They became worried. His wife, concerned, went to the market to buy some things. At the market, the women were gossiping about how the group had been frightened by spirits during the séance. This made his wife even more scared. But she didn't know what to do. That same day, out of nowhere, Mr. Sao walked straight to a nearby temple. The abbot of the temple was actually a relative of Mr. Sao. On that day, the temple was empty because the abbot was working in the garden behind the temple. Mr. Sao walked straight into the temple, then headed to the back where there was a shrine on a rocky hill. On top of the hill, the temple had placed a flag, which was described as a sacred protective flag. The area was surrounded by many flowers. For some unknown reason, Mr. Sao climbed up to the shrine, sat on the rock, pulled out the flag, and broke its pole in half. He stood on top, shouting loudly. The villagers saw him shouting and breaking the sacred flag of the temple. When the abbot arrived, his face turned pale because no one was allowed to touch that flag. The villagers then worked together to bring Mr. Sao back home. The flag, now broken, required the abbot to invite senior monks from other temples to chant and restore its sanctity. The abbot explained that pulling out the flag had caused the spirits that had been residing there for years to scatter and leave the area. After bringing Mr. Sao home, his family called a spiritual healer to perform rituals. At that time, the narrator didn't see Musmai because her family forbade her from interacting with Mr. Sao's household. Additionally, Musmai wasn't home as she had been sent to live with her relatives. Later, when Musmai's aunt recounted the events, she mentioned that when the healer came to chant and perform rituals for Mr. Sao, he appeared very frightened. He sat there listening to the chanting, but every time the healer turned his back, Mr. Sao would face the wall, muttering incomprehensible words to himself. Gradually, the healer stopped coming to the house as Mr. Sao began to improve. He started visiting the temple on his own to listen to the chanting. The narrator recalled that when Mr. Sao was first affected, he looked extremely thin, like a skeleton. However, after learning to chant and pray at the temple, his health improved, and his complexion became rosy again, as if a withered plant had been watered. From then on, whenever anyone asked Mr. Sao about the incident, breaking the sacred flag or the rituals performed at his house, he claimed he couldn't remember anything. As if he had lost his memory entirely. The next story was shared by a female acquaintance. She said her family followed Christianity, and their neighborhood was a Christian community. This incident happened 25 years ago, before she was born. At that time, her mother had only given birth to her elder sister and brother. The story was recounted by her mother. Her family's house was on the main road, meaning that stepping out of the house would immediately lead to the main street. That year, road construction was ongoing. One side of the road had already been paved with concrete and asphalt, while the other side was still unfinished. One night, while watching TV and a soccer match, her father heard a loud crash outside. Immediately recognizing it as a traffic accident, he rushed out to find a serious accident had occurred right in front of their house. There was a young woman whose head had been crushed by a truck, killing her instantly. Blood was everywhere, and it was a gruesome sight. Next to her was a young man lying on the ground, covered in blood. Initially, everyone thought he was dead too, but he was still breathing. The blood on his face was actually from the young woman, having splattered onto him. The authorities and an ambulance were called, and the situation was handled. Afterward, strange occurrences started happening in the family's home. At that time, the narrators, "Playing around like that isn't okay. Every time it happens, Grandma scolds Mom a lot. She says, 'Why do you let my grandchild get soot on their face like that?' Every day I see the child's face covered in soot. Mom didn't even know why it happened. That night, Brother Bar was sleeping with Mom, and she said the soot mark wasn't normal. It stuck very tightly. Normally, soot can be wiped or washed off with water, but this soot on Brother Bar's face was smeared all over and wouldn't come off easily. To clean it, Mom had to use a soapy cloth to scrub it off. Water alone wouldn't work. This happened every day. Additionally, Mom would often hear crying sounds from upstairs while she was putting Brother Bar to sleep downstairs. She thought it was Sister Hai crying, but Sister Hai was sleeping with Dad. Mom went upstairs to check and asked Dad, "Is the baby crying?" Dad replied, "No, the baby is sleeping." When Mom checked, Sister Hai was indeed sound asleep and not crying at all. Mom found this strange and decided to tell Grandma about it the next morning. After hearing Mom's story, Grandma went to get holy water from the Catholic Church and sprinkled it around the bed where Mom slept. However, the strange occurrences continued. At first, it was just minor disturbances. But one night it escalated. While everyone was sleeping, they heard persistent knocking at the door. Mom and Dad weren't afraid of ghosts and opened the door. As soon as they opened it, they saw a shadowy figure, completely black and headless, running quickly out to the street and disappearing. Both Mom and Dad were terrified. Looking down at the doorstep, they found a backpack. They cautiously opened it and discovered it was filled with baby girl clothes, seemingly for a newborn around a month old. That night, Mom and Dad kept the backpack at home, unsure of who it belonged to. The next day, a woman came to their house. She was a relative of a girl who had died in a headless accident right outside their house. The woman explained that the girl's name was Han, and she was only 19 or 20 years old. On the night of the accident, Han and her boyfriend were riding a motorbike to visit her sister, who had just given birth. Han was carrying a backpack of baby clothes when the accident happened, leading to her untimely death. The woman said that since Han's death, her spirit had been very active, causing disturbances. She asked Mom and Dad for permission to build a small shrine at the accident site to appease Han's spirit. However, Mom explained that their neighborhood was predominantly Catholic, and building a shrine would not be allowed. The woman then suggested asking the church priest for permission, but Mom advised her that the priest would likely not approve either. Without a shrine, Han's restless spirit continued to haunt the neighborhood. After the disturbances at Mom and Dad's house, Han's spirit began knocking on neighbors' doors. One night, she knocked on Uncle Chin's door. Uncle Chin, who was a friend of Dad's, thought Dad was playing a prank. He opened the door, ready to scold him, but saw no one there. Looking further, he saw a headless girl in black walking from the road toward Mom and Dad's house. Terrified, Uncle Chin slammed his door shut. Another neighbor, Aunt Knock, who lived nearby, was known for being brave and unafraid of ghosts. However, even she admitted that the headless girl had been haunting everyone in the area. Eventually, the neighbors decided to collectively prepare an offering of food to appease the spirit. After the offering was placed at the accident site, Aunt Knock, skeptical of such rituals, took the food back to her house, intending to eat it herself. While standing by her door with the food, Aunt Knock suddenly saw the headless girl crouching on the table, eating the food. Terrified, she ran inside, but when she looked back, the girl was gone. Overcome with fear, Aunt Knock threw the food onto the street and refused to touch it again. Another neighbor, Uncle Chen, also experienced. It is common to frequently visit your coffee shop when hearing rumors from your neighborhood about the headless girl's spirit. Everyone is scared, except for him, even though he believes in the existence of ghosts. He didn't trust the story about the headless girl haunting the neighborhood. He's not a follower of Christianity and even knows how to summon spirits. So, he decided that on the upcoming full moon night, he would go to the accident site, perform a ritual, and summon the spirit of the girl. Only if she appeared would he believe in her existence. Despite his courage, he was terrified of ghosts. On that full moon night, he took offerings to the middle of the road where the accident happened, set him up, and began the ritual. He hadn't even finished reciting the prayers when suddenly, he saw the girl sitting in front of him, headless. Overcome with fear, he ran away, leaving the offerings behind. The next morning, he went to your coffee shop and shared the story with everyone. Admitting that he now believed in her existence, he suggested calling someone to exorcise her spirit, as it might disrupt the neighborhood. You also heard from someone close to the girl that her boyfriend had been in the same accident but survived. After recovering, he started dating another girl. He even used the same motorbike from the accident, as it wasn't severely damaged and had been repaired. On the first day he took his new girlfriend out on that bike. The spirit of his late girlfriend appeared and haunted him, demanding that he return the bike. She accused him of using their shared possession to carry someone else. Terrified by the sight of his headless former lover, he returned the bike to her family. That bike had been a joint purchase when they were together. During the time she haunted people, she not only scared the neighborhood but also smeared soot on the face of your young nephew nightly. Despite him being only a little over a month old, one night, your grandmother, seeing the chaos, went to the church to ask the priests for a sacred item. She brought it home and placed it near the bed. Since then, the haunting stopped, and your nephew was no longer disturbed. However, due to the prolonged smearing of soot, he was left with scars on his face and nose. Even at 25 years old now, the scars remain. Another story was shared by a female friend. On the 19th or 20th of the lunar calendar this year, her commune held its annual festival. After years of suspension due to the pandemic, the event resumed with festivities, including games and performances. She attended with her husband and her husband's youngest aunt, planning to stay at the aunt's house nearby after the festival. However, on their way back, the once lively venue had turned eerily quiet, and the path was dark and deserted. Being naturally timid and prone to paranormal encounters, she felt uneasy. She used her phone's flashlight to navigate the dark road along the riverbank. After returning to the aunt's house and later heading back to her own home, she passed by the festival site again, which was now completely closed. That night, around midnight, she dreamt of a woman in her room. This woman, believed to be a teacher, wore a pink traditional dress and had sleek hair. Though her face wasn't clear, she appeared to be teaching and questioning her in the dream. The dream felt vivid and unsettling. Waking up, she found herself paralyzed, unable to move or speak. She tried to wake her mother, who was sleeping beside her, but her mother didn't respond. Frightened, she lay still until she heard the sound of an iron hammock being swayed in the kitchen. It was a distinctive sound of chains clinking. She prayed to her late grandfather for protection, and after some time, the noises stopped, and she managed to fall asleep. The next morning, she fell ill with a fever lasting several days. She asked her mother why she didn't respond to her calls during the night, but her mother claimed she hadn't heard anything. Her mother explained that if it was a ghostly encounter, calling out wouldn't have helped. Later, she shared the experience with her husband and mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law revealed that the festival site was once a residential area for teachers, and a female teacher had hanged herself there long ago. Shocked by this revelation, she realized her encounter might have been with the spirit of that teacher. Following this, strange occurrences began at her house. Cooked rice would spoil quickly, even if left out for only a short time. Following advice from elders, she started placing a knife atop the rice pot and hung mulberry branches at the door. These measures seemed to stop the disturbances, and the teacher's spirit no longer appeared. However, the memory of that dream continues to Hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Ghost Stories by Uncle Dewey. I hope you all have an exciting time listening to ghost stories. Dewey thanks everyone very much. Before listening to the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to receive the latest ghost story videos. Now, let's dive into today's story. Today, we continue with tales about people dabbling in black magic. These are the kinds of stories that many people enjoy, about those who use black magic. In these cases, it's often debtors who borrow money and then, when it's time to repay, instead of paying back, they resort to harming others. Now, let's begin with the first story sent to Dewey by a young woman. She shared that on her maternal side of the family, her mother had 3 siblings, her uncle, the eldest, her mother, the middle child, and her youngest uncle. This story revolves around her family and her youngest uncle. Back when the three siblings lived together with their parents, they were still young and shared a joyful, harmonious bond. They loved and cared for one another deeply. However, as they grew older and each had their own household, certain issues began to arise. The incident involving black magic likely happened not too long ago. The girl explained that her mother was closer to her youngest uncle and his wife than to her eldest uncle and his wife. Possibly because the eldest uncle lived farther away and rarely visited. Meanwhile, the youngest uncle and his wife frequently came over to her family's house to visit and spend time. One late night, around 11 or 12 o'clock, the girl was still awake, lying in her room and scrolling through her phone. Suddenly, she heard her youngest uncle and his wife knocking at the door, wanting to come in to discuss something. At that time, her parents were still awake, so they went to open the door and invited the couple inside to talk. The girl, however, stayed in her room but could still overhear the conversation between her parents and her youngest uncle. From what she could gather, her youngest uncle mentioned that a man named Mr. Tam, who lived nearby, was selling a piece of land. The land was priced at 800 million Vietnamese dongs and was a very promising investment. Buying it would yield significant profit. However, her youngest uncle and his wife only had about 200 million Vietnamese dongs on hand. So, they came over to borrow an additional 500 million Vietnamese dongs from her parents to make up the difference and pay for the land the next day. The youngest uncle recently said, "Brother, sister, lend me 500 million Vietnamese dongs. I'll try my best to build because I need to buy this piece of land immediately. It's really good. Next month, I'll pay you back." Seeing the youngest sibling wanting to borrow money to buy land, your parents wanted to help. However, they didn't have 500 million Vietnamese dongs lying around at home. Your mother told him, "Where would I get 500 million? Your father and I barely make enough to live day by day. But I do know someone who can lend us the money. Tomorrow, I'll go to Mrs. Chan and borrow it for you. Her terms are reasonable, so I'll borrow it on your behalf." Hearing this, your youngest uncle and his wife were overjoyed. Even though your parents didn't have money, they could borrow from a trusted source with low interest. That night, your youngest uncle and his wife stayed over at your house, waiting for your mother to visit Mrs. Chan the next morning to borrow the 500 million Vietnamese dongs. Early the next day, your youngest uncle, his wife, and your parents went to Mrs. Chan's house to borrow the money. This lender was known for being trustworthy and offering reasonable rates. However, Mrs. Chan only agreed to let your parents sign the debt papers since she didn't know your youngest uncle or his wife. Ultimately, your parents agreed to take on the debt and signed the papers. They made an agreement with your youngest uncle and his wife that they would pay the monthly interest to your parents, who would then handle the payments to Mrs. Chan. Your youngest uncle and his wife vaguely agreed, saying, "Yes, we'll pay the interest every month." However, after receiving the 500 million Vietnamese dongs, your youngest uncle and his wife completely disappeared. Month after month, they didn't pay any interest or visit your house. You noticed that they never came to pay, but your parents remained silent, using their own money to cover the interest payments. You didn't dare to say anything, fearing your parents' scolding, as this was considered a matter for adults, not children. Over a painfully long period, your parents continued to pay the interest on the 500 million Vietnamese dongs loan. When they could no longer afford it, they borrowed another 500 million Vietnamese dongs from the bank to pay off Mrs. Chan. Since the bank's interest rates were lower, they chose to pay the bank instead. During this time, you noticed your parents working tirelessly, using all their earnings to pay off the bank loan, covering both the principal and the interest. After finally paying off the bank loan, your youngest uncle and his wife returned to ask your parents to borrow another 1 billion Vietnamese dongs. Again from the same source. For some reason, your parents agreed and went back to Mrs. Chan to borrow the money. Because they had repaid the previous loan responsibly, Mrs. Chan loaned them another 1 billion Vietnamese dongs. Your parents handed the money over to your youngest uncle and his wife. Strangely, Your parents didn't seem to consider the possibility that your youngest uncle and his wife might not repay them. It wasn't until much later, after your parents removed certain spells, that your mother revealed. At that time, it felt like we were under someone's influence. We just followed whatever the youngest said, borrowing money and giving it to him. This time, just like before, after receiving the 1 billion Vietnamese dongs, your youngest uncle and his wife went silent. They didn't pay any interest, leaving your parents to quietly cover the monthly payments. When your parents could no longer afford the payments and couldn't borrow from the bank anymore, they finally woke up and realized, why are we paying interest for money we didn't borrow? Why are we covering for them? At that point, your parents went to your youngest uncle's house to demand an explanation. However, when they arrived, your youngest uncle and his wife denied everything, saying, "We never borrowed money from you. We never asked you to borrow money for us. The debt papers have your names on them, not ours. Why should we pay?" Initially, your parents tried to reason calmly since they were family. But after a while, they realized how deceitful your youngest uncle and his wife were. Frustrated, your father raised his voice, demanding, "Are you going to pay or not?" At that moment, your youngest uncle grabbed a knife and threatened to attack your father. Scared, your parents left. At first, they considered giving up, but the amount, 1 billion Vietnamese dongs, was too large to ignore. Moreover, they were at their financial limit and couldn't pay any more. The next day, your parents gathered all the siblings in the family and now, asking that man resulted in your parents losing sleep for several days, constantly worrying to the point of exhaustion. But even now, that issue hasn't been resolved, and yet another problem has already arisen. Starting just a few days later, your father suddenly developed a strange illness, where his whole body began to break out in small, tiny boils and blisters, similar to a rash. The symptoms included severe itching, and he would scratch continuously from head to toe. At first, your mother thought it was just a common rash, so she didn't think much of it and only bought some medicine for him to take. Honestly, rashes are such a common condition that people don't usually pay much attention to them. However, even after taking medicine, your father didn't get better. At this point, everyone began to notice that your father was losing weight rapidly, and the boils weren't healing. Instead, they were growing larger and larger. This caused great concern, and your mother decided to take your father to the dermatology hospital for an examination. There, the doctors said that your father's condition was due to internal heat, similar to liver heat, which caused these boils to appear. They prescribed medicine for him to take at home. However, after taking the medicine, his condition worsened. The boils grew even bigger. Eventually, they reached a breaking point, rupturing and oozing pus. Wherever the pus spread, it caused severe skin ulcers. You saw your father covered in sores, and it was heartbreaking, not knowing what to do. Honestly, you didn't know how your parents managed to cope during that time, your father bedridden and your family burdened with debt. The next morning, while your mother was out shopping at the market, she coincidentally encountered a woman. This woman stared intently at your mother and said, "Mom, I noticed that your face, especially your brow area, looks dark and gloomy. I sense that your family might be facing a great misfortune." Hearing this, your mother felt a glimmer of hope that this woman might be able to help. She opened up and shared everything with her. After listening, the woman told your mother to bring your father to her house the next day. She gave your mother her address and left. That evening, however, your mother started developing the same symptoms as your father. Tiny boils appeared all over her body, just like his. Realizing that both of them were likely dealing with a spiritual issue, your parents decided to visit the woman's house early the next morning. When your parents arrived at the woman's house, they saw that she wasn't just an ordinary market vendor but appeared to be living in a shrine-like space. She asked them if they had any conflicts or grudges with anyone. Your mother recounted the story of the dispute with your uncle and aunt. The woman then confirmed her suspicion, saying, "I knew it. Your faces look so dark and ominous. You've definitely been cursed with two types of spells, one that causes physical illness and another that creates skin ulcers." After her diagnosis, the woman instructed your mother to gather various types of leaves, along with offerings like paper money, fruits, and cakes, and return to her house the following day. Your mother later recounted this to you, but she didn't share the details of what the woman did to resolve the issue, as it seemed she didn't want to reveal too much. Thankfully, just a day after the ritual, your father's sores began to dry up and scab over, healing gradually. Your mother's boils, which were still in the early stages, also began to shrink and disappear within a few days. Both of them recovered completely, though your father was left with some scars. Once they had regained their health, your parents decided to confront your uncle and aunt again. They wanted to address the debt issue and also question why they would resort to such malicious actions. However, when they arrived at your uncle's house, they were shocked to learn that your uncle had fallen gravely ill with a strange disease. He was bedridden, covered in sores much worse than your father's. The ulcers had eaten deep into his flesh, causing severe infections and necrosis. The stench of rotting flesh filled the house. Your mother described how unbearable the smell was when she stepped inside. It was overwhelming. Inside the house, only your uncle was present, along with a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Bay, who appeared distressed. Your parents asked Mrs. Bay what had happened, and she revealed a shocking story. Apparently, Mrs. Bay had seen your uncle drinking and decided to visit his house to chat with your aunt. However, when she arrived, she couldn't find your aunt anywhere. Curious, she went into the kitchen and saw your aunt holding a packet of yellow powder. The powder resembled turmeric but was slightly darker in. The powder was mixed into the salad bowl to serve Uncle UT for drinking. That's when she noticed something unusual. She asked, "Liu, what did you add in? It looks strange." At that moment, Aunt Bay noticed that Aunt UT seemed very nervous, acting as if she was caught doing something wrong. Aunt UT didn't expect Aunt Bay to suddenly come into the kitchen like that. Aunt Bay said, "I saw her saying it was annatto oil, and she mixed it in. But I found it very odd. Who puts annatto oil in salad? And this packet wasn't even annatto oil. How could I not recognize the color of annatto oil at my age? This was some kind of powder, not turmeric or annatto oil." Though feeling suspicious, Aunt Bay didn't ask further. Thinking it was their private matter, she left to sit with others in the front of the house. A few days later, when there was no gathering or drinking, Aunt Bay visited again. She saw Aunt UT mixing that same powder into food again. This time, she noticed Uncle UT looking unwell, lying down, with sores and black spots appearing on his body. Aunt Bay asked, "Liu, what's wrong with your husband? His skin looks terrible, like he's got warts. It's horrifying." Aunt UT replied vaguely, saying she had taken him to the doctor. When others came to check on Uncle UT, Aunt UT and her children were nowhere to be found. Aunt Bay searched the house for anything valuable left behind and found a small box near where Uncle UT was lying. Opening it, she found 3 small fabric pouches. Curious, she opened the pouches and discovered hair and fingernails, along with pieces of paper listing the names, birth dates, and genders of 3 individuals. One pouch belonged to Uncle UT, while the other 2 had names Aunt Bay didn't recognize. There was also a small bottle of yellow liquid inside the box, emitting a foul smell even without opening it. Aunt Bay suspected it was some kind of witchcraft or curse, especially with the hair, nails, and names involved. Later, Aunt Bay shared her findings with your parents, revealing the names in the first 2 pouches, which turned out to be theirs. She explained everything she discovered and urged them to help Uncle UT. Despite your father's anger and refusal, he said, "Let him die. I won't help." But your mother, feeling compassion for her younger brother, insisted on helping. Aunt Bay advised them to take the box to a spiritual healer for assistance. They brought Uncle UT and the box to the healer, with Aunt Bay accompanying them. The healer only allowed your parents inside, leaving Aunt Bay and Uncle UT outside. The healer said, "Why bring him here so late? It's already too severe. The curse has reached his bones and blood. He's nearly gone." Your mother handed over the box, and the healer explained its contents. The yellow liquid was a mix of women's feces and ashes from burned talismans, used to curse your parents. However, the spell had backfired on Uncle Ut, consuming him from within. The healer warned that Uncle Ut's condition was critical and might not be reversible, but agreed to try her best. The healer also mentioned a pot of cursed plants growing in Uncle Ut's house, which needed to be removed. She instructed him to find the pot near the kitchen and dispose of it. "Get up here for me quickly." After that, everyone went home, and your mother continued to take the pot of medicinal plants to the shaman's house. The shaman tried her best to help, but perhaps your youngest uncle was already too severely affected. Within just a month, your youngest uncle passed away, unable to hold on. As of now, the whereabouts of your youngest aunt and her 2 children are unknown. No one knows where they are or where they might be hiding. Your parents mentioned that the time from when they discovered they were under a curse to when it was removed took about 2 months. During this period, your youngest uncle suddenly fell ill. It was then that everyone realized how severely he had been affected. Firstly, it was because the curse backfired on him, as both the youngest uncle and aunt had used black magic against your parents. Secondly, when he was alive, you knew he often drank excessively and mistreated his wife and children. This likely caused your youngest aunt to harbor resentment and use black magic to harm him. Ultimately, your youngest uncle was struck by 2 types of curses at once. Now, when you ask your parents about that time, they say they were naive and simply followed instructions. They were told to borrow money and give it to someone, so they did without questioning. Your mother said they were cursed, so they didn't really understand what was happening. They just borrowed money and handed it over. Currently, your parents are working hard to repay the debt of 1 billion Vietnamese dongs. So far, they have managed to pay off half of it and continue to work diligently to clear the remaining amount. In the end, those who did evil and harmed others had to pay the price. The family is now shattered and scattered. Your youngest uncle paid with his life. As for his wife and children, no one knows where they are now. You believe that your youngest aunt will inevitably face consequences, one way or another, sooner or later. There's also another story involving debt that you shared. At that time, a person you knew deceived you and borrowed money. They messaged you to ask for the loan, but when you tried to collect it, they refused to pay. The 2 of you exchanged harsh words, and then that person blocked you on Facebook, cutting off all contact. Essentially, they just took your money and refused to return it. Predicting that they would block you, you went to their personal Facebook profile, took a screenshot, and posted it in various social media groups to warn others. You explained that this person had scammed you by borrowing money and not returning it, hoping to prevent others from falling into the same trap. At the time, you thought it was a simple solution. You accepted that the money was gone since it wasn't a significant amount and decided to warn others by posting their photo. However, the next day, late at night, that person unblocked you and messaged you and your spouse, pleading for forgiveness. They sent messages like, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, please take down the post. I know I was wrong. Please don't post it anymore. I'm truly sorry." After repeatedly apologizing and begging, you felt pity and decided to delete the post and not share it further. Strangely, after that, the person started sending you and your spouse numerous messages, thanking you and wishing you well. They wrote things like, "Thank you so much. Please take care of your health. I wish you and your son good health." You found it odd because this was someone who had scammed you. Yet they were now sending such sweet messages. They didn't offer to return the money but kept apologizing and wishing your family well. Your spouse also felt uneasy, noting how unusual their behavior was. They apologized, but their tone seemed strange and even spiteful. That very night, after reading those messages, you and your spouse put your child to bed. However, the child wouldn't sleep peacefully. They were restless, screaming and crying uncontrollably. When you tried to calm them, they bit everyone in the family. This continued until exhaustion finally made the child fall asleep. The next day, the situation persisted. The child would sleep in the early evening but start screaming and crying around 2 to 3 a.m., their eyes tightly shut. You mentioned that anyone who believes in spiritual matters knows that 2 to 3 a.m. is considered the time of spirits. The child's hands and feet were cold, and they kept pointing toward the door, wanting to go outside. You and your spouse tried to soothe the child, but they continued screaming until around 4 a.m., when they finally calmed down and slept. The next morning, your family assumed it was just teething pains, as children often behave this way when teething. You dismissed it and didn't think much of. It's so tiny, especially when its grandparents wanted to hold it. It slapped them hard on the face as if it intentionally wanted to hurt them. There were times it bit both you and your mom, leaving bruises on your skin. If you made it upset, it would bite even harder and more aggressively. At that point, it was completely out of control. For about 2 weeks, no one in the house could sleep because it only slept for 1 or 2 hours a night. You wondered if there's any child who sleeps only 2 or 3 hours a night. There must be something wrong. The next day, everyone decided to take the baby to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor said the baby was completely normal. All its health indicators were fine. It wasn't lacking any nutrients, didn't have a stomachache, or was teething. However, the doctor suggested that it might be hyperactive during the day, making it difficult for the baby to sleep at night. The family was advised to try their best to manage the situation. If the doctor said everything was normal, you started to suspect there might be a spiritual issue. You noticed that all the strange incidents with your son happened between midnight and 4 to 5 a.m., and then everything returned to normal during the day. Especially after you received a message from someone who owed you money. Your son's behavior continued for 2 weeks. After returning from the hospital, your parents brought some offerings and invited spiritual masters to perform rituals to see if the baby was affected by anything. Surprisingly, after the rituals, the baby became calm and stopped acting out at night. You couldn't help but believe in spiritual matters. After those exhausting 2 weeks, the family continued to take the baby to the temple daily, where the monks performed blessings. Eventually, the baby was completely healthy and peaceful. You mentioned that your family, including your wife, follows Buddhism, while you are an atheist and don't believe in any religion. However, after this incident, you realized that there are things beyond explanation, and you must acknowledge them. You also learned that spiritual matters should not be taken lightly, especially in households with children under 5 to 6 years old. If children are affected by spiritual issues, they cannot express their feelings or desires, making it even harder to address. Even though society and science have advanced significantly, spirituality still exists in subtle ways. You advised families with young children to avoid posting their photos or personal information on social media. Sometimes, even minor details can be used to harm children. If adults can be targeted, imagine how vulnerable children are. And that's the end of our story. Before wrapping up, don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to support Dewey. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to leave a comment below to share your thoughts with everyone. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories coming soon. Goodbye, everyone.